All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Good morning. Welcome to the inaugural STARS track at the ASU+GSV Summit. For those who don't know me, I'm Sheldon. I'm an analyst and a partner at William Blair. And William Blair is thrilled to be partnering with GSV to co-host the STARS track, which will consist of 8 panels over the today and tomorrow. Comprised of some of the executives of some of the leading public and private ed tech companies in the space. And we hope you'll join for more of these, although there's not much seating in here, so apologies for that for everyone. With that said, we'll start off this morning with our panel here focused on strategies for K-12 excellence. And I'd like to quickly introduce the panelists that have been generous with their time and spending some time with us this morning. So to my right, I've got Adam Klaber, who is the Vice Chair and COO of Imagine Learning. To his right, we have Ritu Narayan, who is the CEO and founder of Zoom. Next is Felix Ohswald, CEO and co-founder of GoStudent. And then Advait, Shinde, the CEO and co-founder of GoGuardian. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, panelists. We'll just jump right in. We've got about 35 minutes here. And I think the first place I want to start is just kind of thinking about level setting, for the last few years. Obviously, a lot has changed in the K-12 ecosystem. Some good, probably a lot bad, looking at test scores, looking at proficiency levels, things like that. So maybe as we think about the pandemic, what did it mean for the K-12 ecosystem, and maybe factor in both positive and negative aspects of what's changed? And I don't know where we want to start. Did you want to start at the end, Advait?
Sure. I think straight off the bat, just the rapid adoption of one-to-one and the acceleration that we saw in terms of technology use is, I think we'll look back on that in the grand scheme of history as a really big net positive. I think obviously the corresponding learning loss and the struggles associated with remote learning and all of those challenges and ultimately how the ecosystem is mobilizing now after the pandemic to actually bridge that learning loss. That's obviously a continued headwind and something that is on everyone's minds for sure.
I think one of the things that is not talked enough about is educators. This conference, and I think this is my 11th one to see, I think it's 7,000 people walking around, and all thinking about technology, and we refer to it as a technology conference, but really it's an education conference, and it's about how educators can best affect the change for students, for educators, administrators, and their parents, and I think that's what's changed so much with COVID, is that educators need to change, and that's the opportunity in front of all of us.
I'm going to bring in an aspect which is very less thought about, is the access to education through mobility, and that came into forefront during pandemic when everything stopped. 27 million kids travel twice daily on the yellow school bus system or the school transportation system. An interesting thing that came to light was remote learning it's very amazing that it became a supporter for those children, but people also realized how important the school infrastructure is. It's not just for education, but it's a place where students get social and emotional learning, they get food, they get like physical education, everything. So for us, it became very clear that how important that infrastructure is, and we need to digitize and modernize that infrastructure.
Yeah, one point to take on that. I think it was a really, really bad idea to close schools down. I think we have seen that globally, once schools were closed over a longer period of time, it has really negative implications on the kids' education. So kids going to schools, I think, is a good thing. We definitely have seen that. And the second point, on the educator side, I agree that the teachers play the most important part in the children's education, right? They are the ones that inspire the children. And education is about inspiring young people and giving them like an outlook, a potential, what they can work on. And the teacher plays really the crucial role. And I think technology and K-12 in general can help to shorten that teacher gap and bring more amazing teachers into the schools and inspiring our future generation.
And I think where that comes from is, what do the teachers need? And so I'm the CEO of Imagine Learning. I don't know how many of you know the company. We're the largest digital curriculum provider in the US. We have about 2,600 employees. with a singular focus on igniting learning breakthroughs. And what that really means is providing the tool sets that either students individually can access for that learning or for teachers to do it. And part of what the pandemic has really driven through is that the quality of that curriculum, not just a course, not just a snippet on a video, not just a small pamphlet, but true curriculum that takes students through their learning profile is what's needed. And that there were a lot of little startups that had some pretty cool ideas, but to really scale the way districts had to do really required that leading edge type products.
And maybe that'll tie, I mean, I think one of the big question marks in this space is how do we really truly personalize the learning experience for students? So what would a truly personalized learning experience for students look like? And what are the biggest structural impediments in your view to being able to get there?
I think straight off the bat, just simply understanding at the level of each individual kid what their baseline level of understanding is across all of the relevant set of skills. Like that, I think, is a challenge in and of itself. From there, actually delivering differentiated instruction to each kid on the basis of where their current set point is, but perhaps incorporating other elements of personalization, including their learning preferences or their interests or things like that. And coming to the structural challenges, I think we have a K-12 system or structure that revolves around the in-person classroom experience, the 30-to-1 ratio and so on. And so to the extent that there's a limitation in that, the idea that there's one singular experience that every kid is having in that classroom, that I think fundamentally prevents the possibility of things like differentiation. And I think it's going to require alternative or complementary approaches, including things like the flipped classroom or much more focus on like group differentiated instruction and things like that. I think the quick final thing that I'll say here is that the theory of how to educate kids more effectively is, the jury is not out on this. Like there is so much evidence to suggest that these alternative approaches of mastery-based learning and differentiated learning and so on drive way more engagement and way more effective educational outcomes. And so I think the challenge that we all have over here is how do we take that theory and bring it into practice in the classroom, really appreciating the challenges of the structural impediments of K-12 and really being bold to reimagine new workflows and new structures.
One point on that, personalization in education can be achieved when we collect enough data around the learning journey, right? And I see in education, we are all very strongly opinionated when it comes to education. Everybody believes they know best what their kids need and what other kids need, and we are quite emotional about it. We all spend years in schools ourselves, so we had all made our own experiences. But what I see quite rarely is really understanding the fundamental data behind the learning journey and using that data to make then certain hypotheses and decisions. In our case, for example, at GoStudent, we are one of the largest tutoring companies in the world, doing more than 1 to 2 million lessons every month. So we can collect a lot of data around a one-on-one teaching experience and use that data to personalize that learning experience for the kid even more. And I think in order to drive what you said further is really collecting and understanding data in classrooms, outside classrooms, in these learning journeys to improve that experience for kids.
For us, the journey of the students' learning actually starts from the time they leave the school, leave the home towards the school. And you'll be surprised to know students on an average spend more than an hour in the current system. And collecting some of these personalized data and really making the experience of the students amazing during that period and reducing the time by optimizing routes and optimizing things is a big deal for us. For example, we work with Oakland Unified School District, and 70% of the students used to travel more than an hour, and after Zoom got into the picture there, less than 10% of the students travel more than an hour just by using the data and actually reorganizing their entire transportation system. So and now people there tell us that kids are more engaged in the classroom and they can make use of these amazing learning experiences that people are designing for them.
And have you seen school districts focus more on that problem, the logistical problem, getting the students to the school as quickly as possible? Has that become a bigger focal point in the last couple of years?
It's a comprehensive thing. They worry about the experience of the student itself. Like, as you have seen, the enrollment reduced after COVID. A lot of students were found missing or not going back to the school. So bringing kids back to the school is a big focus for them, and including the visibility and safety and security has become a very big priority with everything going on.
On the adaptive side, I mean, the biggest focus as a digital curriculum provider that we think about, right? And it's easy to say, people talk a lot about it, but it comes down to a great deal amount of assessments of students and their progress, and then to be able to render them age-appropriate curriculum that meets their needs so that they can grow. So it's a topic we'll talk about now, we talk about for years, and probably many, many more years to come, but it is the ability to drive outcomes the greatest. And it is what keeps students engaged, because at the end of the day, an engaged student, someone who's on task, who is actively participating in the learning process, will grow. They will do better, but you have to provide that, that content that's age appropriate for them.
Very helpful. Maybe for Advait, I think, how do you think about, with your solutions in particular, how do you think about measuring and improving the efficacy of software and content? As you think about K-12 software, there's a lot of providers out there. And how much more can be done on this front? And how do your kind of solutions play into that?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating and amazing that the industry is focused so much on efficacy, and I think that's a trend that should continue. Ultimately, school districts have massive budgets and are spending across so many segments, taking risks on certain vendors and certain approaches. And ultimately, I think we need to close the loop on how those approaches and how those investments are ultimately meaningfully driving learning outcomes or not, so that we can actually reallocate resources towards the structures and systems that are actually working most effectively. So I love this theme. I think in terms of how to actually measure, I'm really encouraged by how, as a society, we seem to be moving from summative assessment, which is sort of very infrequent, monolithic, towards more formative assessment, all the way to the simple idea of every single question response that a student is providing in real time should be used as meaningful information that indicates whether that student is actually progressing or not. And to the degree that we can zoom in at the level of like hour-to-hour progression, I think it allows us to conclude much more reliably on whether the preceding learning experiences that student is having are working or not. And conversely, if you zoom out to the level of a week or a month or a year, there's just way too many conflating variables that influence an annual academic outcome to be able to definitively know what's working and what's not working. So my hope is that we can continue the momentum as an industry, zooming in at the level of really micro educational experiences and establish whether they're actually working or not at scale.
Got it. Wanted to maybe shift a little bit towards thinking about the budgetary environment. There's a lot of focus right now on the impact of federal stimulus funding, the ESSER funding that's flowing through the ecosystem. So I guess, what has the impact been on the K-12 ecosystem? And would you say, as you think about your own business, has it supported stronger top-line growth? And how do you see school districts utilizing it? I feel like a lot of school districts might be using it for different ways. I guess, what do you see out there? What are some of the commonalities?
Well, I think, no doubt, it's enhanced investment in education by the federal government has helped. It has helped virtually all the businesses that operate in this space. The question is, how effective are those investments? And that's what the schools and the districts are really trying to focus on. And the number one really indicator on that is usage, right? Are they using the technology? Are they using these products for growth? We don't really worry about the funding aspect at all. What we worry about is the usage in our products. And are we building the best products that students love to be on, that teachers love to teach from, and that administrators can learn from the results of those, and that increasingly more and more that parents can be involved in that process. And so that's our focus as a business.
I was having a conversation with a former superintendent yesterday, and he anecdotally suggested that a lot of his peers are actually afraid of spending this government stimulus money out of concern that they will be made an example by either political party in the context of federal funds being used inappropriately to ultimately not drive educational outcomes. So it seems like we've really hit ourselves with an own goal on this one. The idea that with all of this tremendous learning loss, we've created a political challenge of being able to actually improve on the front of learning loss because of the inherent political challenges here. I think that's a real tragic situation.
There are politics involved in education?
What a concept.
One aspect of the funding that may not be as visible I want to bring in is transportation is at the disruption point where there are 500,000 school buses on the road and less than 1% of them are electrified or sustainable. So there's a big push from federal government, from IRA and EPA to electrify the school buses, and a lot of funding available, and exactly the same challenge where people don't know how to use those funds because it's so challenging for them to actually have a playbook and implement the whole thing. And that's where we try to make it effective by making that adoption easier for the districts.
Got it. And maybe for Felix, you have heavy exposure to the European market. Curious, are there any notable differences to call out? When comparing and contrasting the U.S. K-12 market versus some of your bigger European markets in terms of the pain points that you're seeing over there. There's a lot of pain points here around teacher challenges, personalizing learning for students. I guess what does it look like if you had to compare and contrast what the U.S. market might look like versus the European?
In Europe, the overall issue is like this extreme level of fragmentation, right? So there's no like European central budget of education and clear guidelines how that has to be used across the countries. Every country can basically set up their own rules how to distribute budgets. In Germany, for example, as one example, there's a program for families that cannot afford tutoring services. Yeah, it's called Bildung und Teilhabe. So families that earn below a certain threshold, they can get state funding that pays for the tutoring services. But from an administration standpoint, for the families to actually access that money in the local districts, that is extremely complicated and cumbersome. So this is just a bunch of examples that there are initiatives, but to access it and to make it available is another story. My personal opinion around that in general is, I think if you want to build a really large-scale K-12 company across the world, you should find a way to not be dependent on these like federal funding programs. Because the second you go down that path, there's always this political fluctuation and certain dependency. And if you look today at the largest businesses globally in terms of revenue in the K-12 industry, yes, they can profit from federal funding programs and they can do public-private partnerships, but they should not solely rely on that.
Got it. Maybe, and so I guess this topic's been talked about a little bit, but just as you think about data and analytics in the ecosystem, where do you see it currently being used and making a difference? What are you hopeful as you think, 5 years down the road, what are you hopeful that the ecosystem could do over time?
I don't know, maybe I'll take a cut at that. I mean, at one level, districts are becoming more sophisticated in at least understanding that they have to have metrics. Now, the metrics really span a number of areas, from the basic levels of attendance and time kids arrive to school, all the way to the high stakes testings at the end of the year. So there's such a plethora of data aspects out there, but it's still, I think, very much in the early stages of it. Are you focusing on just usage? Are you focusing on growth? How do you get to growth? There was a very interesting panel my colleague Elizabeth was on yesterday on assessments around the fascination of how they basically don't work, and that how do you have to have a true assessment, you have to have 100 questions. See if I was paying attention, Elizabeth. But if you just ask 20 questions, it's really more luck. And then how do you even interpret all that information? So it is, it is a big data world in education, and I think we're going to see a lot of changes over time around how it is used and to understand it.
I think a pitfall that I see often is looking at data as a objective or a solution in and of itself, therefore substantiating things like data centralization or building massive data warehouses or things like that. And I think it really begs the question, like, what are we trying to accomplish with this data? And being really, really clear about the ultimate objectives that the school district is aiming for and us over here as ed tech vendors are aiming for. And to that end, I think focusing on deliberately understanding academic progression at the level of skills and at the further granularity of real-time understanding, I think is probably a fantastic starting point. And I think we're starting to see much more of the industry shift to that rapid iteration mindset. But to me, that starting there frames how you think about data collection and data centralization, which tools you adopt, and it further allows you to actually update your workflows so as to be able to generate the right data in the first place, as opposed to starting with this data as this like fixed thing that you have to then centralize. Yeah.
Let me give you one very easy example in our business how data can make a difference. So in our tutoring company, we have two parts. We have one part of the business that is 100% online, connecting one child with one teacher, fully online, our own virtual classroom, follow their journey. Then we have another part of the business where we did an acquisition of an offline tutoring company. It's an offline tutoring company that runs 1,000 physical centers, like a Sylvan Learning in the US or a Mathnasium that you guys are familiar with. When we compare, in our online business model, we have much higher teacher retention because we can collect more data around the teachers that we onboard on the platform, the selection process of the teachers, maintaining the relationship with the teachers, maintaining that community, maintaining the relationship with the kids. So overall, our retention data, the teachers that stick with us, coming back to the point about educators, we can much better monitor it to basically have a better lifetime value for the teacher. In the offline business, we have much less availabilities and options to collect data around this teacher journey, and that ultimately results in lower teacher retention. So flipping that example into the normal, traditional morning market, typical schools, being able to collect data, we can, for example, clearly specify we want to collect the data to make sure that we can keep teachers closer to us and build a stronger relationship and better retention. That's just one very concrete example in our business.
Yeah, let's maybe dig in a little bit more on the labor challenges, because that's a big issue right now. So as you think about the industry, there's a lot of concern about teachers leaving the industry. So from an industry perspective, how do we think about making teachers' lives easier? How do we increase the pipeline of people coming into the system? And maybe also maybe layer in your solutions. Like, how do you think about your role, your company's role in making teachers' lives easier?
Sure. Maybe I'll kick that off. From a curriculum perspective, it's about having product sets that assist the teacher along the way, and the recognition from our end that the teachers are much less experienced than they used to be, but they are much more digitally native than they used to be. And so it's the combination of those two aspects that we are focusing on to really help the teacher profile. So that's one set of solutions we have around the digital curriculum. The other side, we have an instructional services business which provides online teachers to support existing teachers in districts where they don't have them. I do want to make one other point. I'm going to come back to the data piece just for 1 second, because we didn't mention one topic around the data, which is a real challenge for everyone in the industry, and it's about security and privacy. And so the more data that is collected at a student level, at a teacher level, at a classroom level, the more sensitivity there is in that. And one of the biggest areas of cost of increases that we're making is the investment in that. And we see that because we're quite inquisitive, we acquire a large number of businesses, many of the smaller providers in this space really aren't thinking about that and aren't making the necessary investments. And all it takes in a district is one security breach to really disrupt the concept that a digital and hybrid learning experience is a positive one. So just wanted to at least cover that on the data side, but then back to helping teachers.
Anything else on the labor shortage or data security?
Well, everybody has heard about huge driver shortages, school bus driver shortages, to an extent that in Philadelphia, central guards were called to drive the children to school. And typically, schools were facing over 30% driver shortages, making the schools go this thing. So that's one thing with using data and modern technology. We've been able to do really well in terms of modernizing the hiring process. And similar to teacher experience that would describe, like how to assist the driver throughout the journey using technology, and so that they can actually focus just on the driving and experience of the students rather than worrying about all the million things that happen when you have 30 to 60 kids in the back, is something which is amazingly can be done using technology and really revolutionize.
I think when we think about the teacher role, and you just simply enumerate the hundreds and hundreds of responsibilities that a teacher has in the classroom, everything from inspiring and motivating kids all the way to behavioral management and attendance. I think it's clear that there's some subset of the teacher role that is absolutely critical and foundational to the ultimate flourishing of students, and that there's a corresponding inverse subset of the teacher role that's really a pain, and it's commoditized, and it hurts, and it takes away time. The opportunity cost is so real in terms of the teacher's inability to focus on those higher value elements. I think a core foundational thesis of GoGuardian overall has been, how do we identify the elements of the teacher role that are more automatable, that we can essentially create tools that save teachers time and improve teacher coherence, allowing them to have higher levels of insight and spend more time in the highest value areas that ultimately result in deep inspiration for students.
Maybe one question to the audience. How many of you ever stood in a classroom in front of young people and did a presentation or was doing some sort of lecture? Oh, quite a lot, actually. It's brutal, isn't it? I mean, now here we are all adults and grown-ups, and we all pretend to listen, or we do listen, but standing in front of a classroom of like 12, 13-year-old kids and trying to engage with them and motivate them, it's really, really tough. And doing that day by day over years is just very challenging. And I think in order to basically try to solve for that is also the recognition. I'm not sure how it is exactly in the US, but in Europe, for example, if you tell other people that you want to become a teacher, the first reaction is, you are out for the holidays. Yes, so allow this. But if you tell other people, I don't know, you want to become a medical doctor, then everybody is kind of, that's amazing, right? Even if the salaries also for medical doctors in Europe at least may not be very high. So it's less of a salary topic, in my opinion, than more of a recognition topic. So showing this recognition to the educators and to the people who really go day by day to the young kids and deal with them, I think that is a big part that we can solve there without spending huge amounts of money.
At the end of the day, right, we had to make teachers' jobs easier in all of the products and services that we bring to market. They had to, whether the kids get to school on time, whether it provide tutoring and other curriculum services. And I think it probably comes down to the next question, which you probably have, Stephen, is because by my record, we have not talked about generative AI,
That was coming up next.
ChatGPT yet, and that is the longest. So we get all panelists, we get an award from GSV for not bringing it up yet.
Well, that brings up my next topic. So AI and generative AI. And I guess you can answer this. I was going to bring that up within the last 5 minutes, but and at whatever level you want to talk about it at, the societal level, the industry level, your company, how are you thinking about the implications? And I guess, and I'm going to ask this, are you optimistic, fearful, both? How are you thinking about it?
I think anyone who says they aren't fearful is maybe lying or hasn't thought through the fullest implications of this. That said, I think I am also incredibly optimistic about this, particularly to the extent that all this academic research that I've been talking about how to educate kids more effectively ultimately revolves around first understanding where they're at, and second, delivering tailored instruction based on their initial understanding. It's extremely simple, and it should be super intuitive to everybody that that kind of structure will be dramatically more effective in terms of driving educational engagement and educational outcomes. And further, if you layer on additional elements of personalization to increase the relevance of what you're saying to the kids by adding in personal references or all aspects that sort of enable much more coherence to the student, that further just increases engagement. And so I think it's clear that generative AI has the ability to deliver that last mile educational experience to that kid in a way that's just hyper-personalized at unprecedented levels. And even further juxtaposing it to the studies in the 80s and the 90s about independent or one-on-one tutoring and differentiated learning, I think that large language models in particular are able to deliver an even more individualized and personalized experience than anyone has even thought was possible, even comparing it to a human tutor. And so I think we're at the sort of turning point of something that's absolutely incredible, and I'm really encouraged to see everybody thinking about this topic and talking about it. Ultimately, I think it's going to redefine not just education in terms of how it works or the workflows, but much of society overall in terms of what knowledge workers are and what their primary roles are and so on.
I'm generally optimistic, although I have not seen yet a really good use case in education that fully convinced me, to also be honest. As an example, we in the UK, we run a content business that is kind of a learning software that is used by 70% of kids in the UK on a monthly basis, where teachers assign homework assignments to kids, and then they can do these assignments at home. And we have tested two things. So we have tested to provide a virtual tutor to all kids, a couple of millions of kids that use the platform there on a monthly basis. The results were not so encouraging, to be honest, because when you give kids this kind of virtual tutor by their hand, they struggle a lot in formulating the right questions. It's also for adults, by the way. It's not just for kids. To really leverage the power of it, you also need to ask pretty smart questions. A lot of people struggle with that. So helping kids also to formulate these questions, we have seen that the usage, actually, the retention on the usage of this, we called it Amelia, the virtual tutor, dropped significantly after a couple of times. So what we then did, we turned around to the educators, actually, to the teachers, and we predefined prompts that help them to do their lesson planning automatically. Because teachers spend a lot of time in actually preparing for the upcoming lessons, whether this is in school or in the tutoring industry. And there, what we did, based on the data, we automatically helped them to create these lesson plans to save a real amount of time for the teacher. And that is something it's still quite early to give conclusive results on that, but there we see a big potential at the moment in our case.
I'm optimistic at the same time, like cautiously optimistic about the fact that I have a middle schooler myself, and you can see how empowered they feel, kids using generative AI and having all the information at their tips. But at the same time, the rapid change in education and the workforce that'll happen, like even thinking about college, what streams will be important, what will become completely outdated. So only the scary part is how fast can we adopt those generative AI in education and actually change the curriculum in a way that kids are more prepared for tomorrow, which we don't know yet, the future that we don't know.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I certainly concur with all my panelists. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. I like to think about the metaphor of being a second or third grade teacher when calculators came out, right? And how fearful everyone was, and kids aren't going to learn how to do math. And so it's a new dimension at Imagine Learning. We have numerous initiatives to drive use cases, from helping to write better code to help to write better curriculum. So it's the beginning of a journey, and let's see where it goes. Optimistic and concerned all at the same time.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists. Very insightful conversation. Really appreciate your time.